I'm Jerod. Nice to meet you. I haven't met you before. For the folks who don't know me, I'm an InfoSec consultant. I've been with Jacadis for 4 years. It's a small shop over in Hilliard that sits between my house and the kids' school. So on those rare occasions, I actually go in the office. It's kind of convenient. That's a rarity anymore. A lot of travel. But my day job for the last 4 years has been going into companies and helping them figure out what security is and how to do it. And one of the big challenges that I've seen, especially in the last 3.5 after I really got into a rhythm, is this notion of what does security look like at our company, being able to define it for the bigger shops, and the smaller shops who have bigger shops telling them, you have to be secure in order for us to do business with you. We're not going to tell you how to do it. We expect you to do it. Good luck. We'll tell you you're doing it wrong when you come back with insufficient information. And as somebody who's, my dad used to have his own business. I understand how hard it is for small shops to run a business. And flip side of that, when I was managing InfoSec at Abercrombie, I understand how hard it is to run InfoSec at a big shop even. And what I found is, what I built this on, is there's not really a good go-to place for just that basic fundamental stuff without getting so deep into the weeds that some of these non-technical business owners have no idea, right? Their eyes glaze over when you're talking to them. They have no idea. You send somebody a survey and say, I need you to do these things in order to do business with our company. This is what security needs to look like at your company. I can tell you firsthand, they will answer yes to every question, including the ones they don't understand, because if they say no to anything, it risks their business, right? It risks their revenue stream. And what I want to get away from, and what I'm hoping comes out today, is I want to stop bullshitting ourselves and each other about what security should look like in order to really have an impact on keeping systems up, keeping them online when they need to be there, or making sure that the data that we're putting into these systems, the personal and private data, stays personal and private. So that's where this comes from. My agenda for the talk, there's a little more structure to it than this, but you'll be able to tell. Yes, sir?
You forgot to close directly on that.
Oh, I'm not done yet.
Oh.
So, but I do have some structure to how I want to present this, but if I get a little emotional, a little animated, if I'm walking so far back and forth that the camera can't stay on me, apologies. It's just how I'm wired. So why are we in this business in the first place? Because bad things are going to happen. It doesn't matter if you are a multinational, international billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar retailer, or a small mom-and-pop shop that sells medical equipment through an online storefront. You are a target because you have money, because somebody doesn't like your company's stance on how they do business. Again, coming from a guy who worked at Abercrombie, I know that there are people that hate you just because of who you are. Understanding that these bad things are going to happen and accepting that these bad things are going to happen is step one in understanding why we need security and what that security needs to look like. When you're talking to a small business owner, let me get a show of hands real quick. How many of you work with large organizations that push that questionnaire out to the small companies saying, are you secure? How many people are on the flip side of that, where you're getting these questionnaires and you're like, God, I wish they'd stop? In either case, you know your business better than the other side of the house. It's hard for us to get into the details of how smaller shops operate if we're working in a big shop, because we've got so many folks that we have to keep up with, because there's so much on our plate in any given day that I can't sit down with every business owner and say, tell me what your day looks like beginning to end. Tell me how you're going to hit payroll this month. Tell me how you stack up against your competitors. Are you still going to be in business a year from now? Or, where do things stand? We don't always go into that level of detail. We just flip them a random, or not random, but a static questionnaire and say, just answer these questions. Let me check the compliance box and we'll move on. But these business owners understand their company culture, their day-to-day operations. They know how they balance revenue and expenses. They meet customer expectations, how they stand out. But this is true for big companies. You know how your company operates. You know, if you're at one of the big shops, You know what your day-to-day looks like. You know how much time and money and effort it's going to take for you to keep up with all these folks and how far that is from your actual security budget and security team size. But understanding that you have your perspective and they have their perspective is also a big, important starting point if you're going to have an effective line of communication. I designed this, again, I'll come back around to the big shops, but I really designed this for those small and medium businesses because I live in the U.S., I grew up in the U.S., and I understand that small and medium businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. This is one of the most recent reports from SBA.gov. I'm not going to read the numbers off to you, but I'll let you see. If you want to understand how our society functions, how our economy functions, based on what people do with their time during a day, based on how we get money to do the things that are important to us, and how we invest that money or spend that money, giving it back. You realize that while the big shops are necessary for employing a lot of people at once, it's really all these little shops that are keeping everything moving. And what I found especially in talking to these shops firsthand over the last 4 years, the security expectations we have for them are ridiculous. It's so far beyond what they're capable, in some cases, of even understanding, let alone implementing, that we're fooling ourselves by thinking that we're making a difference. But it's critical to our society that we're doing the right thing to protect these folks. So the other piece, anybody do Mellow Mushroom? I don't know if you guys go up there. It's good pizza, right? It's we're pizza connoisseurs in my family, if the belly didn't give that away. But this is my kids at Mellow Mushroom. And when I go to work, I'm trying to figure out how to pay the bills, right? I want to be able to provide a certain lifestyle for my family. Every one of these small businesses that you're working with goes home to something like this. They're not just doing security for the sake of doing security. They're trying to run their business because they're trying to live a life. And it's important for us to understand, too, on the flip side, every one of us is going to go home from here today, and we have something that we do outside of security, right? I do writing and filmmaking. I used to. I don't do so much right now. I'm a gamer. Any gamers here? My people. There are things that I do above and beyond InfoSec that are important to me, but one of the reasons I do what I do is to enable that lifestyle. What we don't always understand in the InfoSec space is when we're having these arguments or conversations with our suppliers and our partners, and even our coworkers about how to do security, that we get so caught up in these metrics and minutiae and detail that we forget what's at the heart of why we're doing what we do. It's also important for us to understand that when we put these questionnaires together, or when we put our security programs together, it's not going to match across the board. I can't take ISO 27001, 27002, and just tell every company I do business with, you have to comply with everything in ISO. I can't, by the flip side of that, take the SANS Top 20 PCI, I'll get you started. I can't even take the ASD, the Australian Signals Directorate, their 35 top breach mitigation controls. Great list of things if you want to protect against breaches. But when I look at small shops, I look at big shops, there is no one-size-fits-all. We know that, but the reason I'm bringing that up is I just want us to be honest about it with each other and with the people we work for. What I put in the description of the talk, compliance is killing small businesses. It is ridiculous how much time and money they are pissing away for this exercise in futility that doesn't make a significant enough difference. In some cases, you're going to have some minor improvements, but when you talk about spending $1 to protect a dime, that is exactly what we are doing. I'm working right now on a contract with the state of Ohio. I won't go into detail about the department. But my job is to sit down with these third-party providers who are doing business on behalf of the state. So they're going to have information about citizens in the state of Ohio. They're going to be bound by privacy laws. They're going to be bound by disclosure and making sure that they are appropriately protecting this information. And the department I'm working for had gone through the exercise of putting together a questionnaire for these small business owners to ensure that they were doing security. And I cannot tell you, well, I can, every single one, every single call that I've had with these providers around this questionnaire and how they're doing security has been an education, has been me teaching them what I mean when I say, do you have a risk management plan in place? Which the answer, almost across the board, was, yeah, we back up our data. Okay, I'm glad you back up your data. Do you have a risk management plan in place? I don't even know what you mean by that. Explain it to me. And so the notion that we flip these questionnaires out has demonstrated this huge knowledge gap that we think we can just flip some sub-questions and organizations will automatically understand what they need to do. How many organizations here are bound by PCI? So in the contracts you have with any one of your third-party service providers, what does PCI tell you? If that third-party service provider handles your customer cardholder data, what do you have to write in your contracts? They have to be PCI compliant too. That's stupid. It baffles me that we think that's okay, but what it is it's a reaction, the card brands in this case, to a problem that they need some kind of security, and they don't know how to do it. So they put together a comprehensive, how many questions are PCI? 228. 228 unique controls, if you go through all the requirements and all that, that we're telling people you have to answer all 228 of these questions as yes, including encryption key custodian forms, and even if you're not encrypting or you don't have the encryption processes in place. And that's just one. I've got another client that I'm working with that we worked back and forth on setting up a questionnaire for their third parties. And it was so overwhelming that the response rate, they didn't even try to answer the questions. They didn't even try to follow up because they didn't understand how to do it. Even if I go down to that Australian signals director, their strategies to mitigate targeted cyber intrusion, that is only focused on confidentiality. That is only focused on breaches. It's 35 excellent controls, but the first one, first or second, is that you whitelist the applications on all of your endpoints. How many organizations here whitelist applications on all their endpoints, including mobile devices? Not even the big shops, right? So again, unrealistic, both in terms of size and in terms of scope. How many folks have heard of the Unified Compliance Framework? I dig what these guys are doing. That said, we still have that gap of how we implement security in small businesses. The UCF takes all the standards and all the frameworks and all the regulations, and they throw them together into this concept of authority documents with citations and controls and threats, and they map it all together. The intent is that if you need to comply with multiple regulations, that you can do a control once, and they'll figure out how that maps to other controls. Great idea and concept, works reasonably well for bigger shops, especially if you can afford a GRC, a governance risk and compliance tool. But there are 650 authority documents at my last count. The number keeps growing every year because we keep releasing more of these. We did 25,000 citations and an annual subscription. So a recurring fee is going to be at least $1,000 a year for these small business owners to tap into a tool like that. And I can tell you from talking to a lot of these small business owners, a lot of them don't even have that extra $1,000 a year to throw into this. It's a step beyond. And if I get outside of just the individual license, it's $20,000 a year for corporate. So it's a great concept, but it's difficult for people to have access to it. And the end result is that we are throwing so much information at these people that they're shutting down. They don't even know how to do security. They just want the phone calls to stop. They want the emails to stop. They just want to get back to running their business. And that's entirely fair, folks. If we are asking people to do security to a point that, that they're losing sight of what their business is supposed to be doing in the first place, we're doing it wrong. then we're not asking the right questions. And we're putting, again, unrealistic expectations on the people we're working with. So what I want to do is I want to take a step back and I want to gain a little perspective. I want to go back a few years and I want to remember what InfoSec looked like when we got into this in the first place. Revisit in hopes of understanding where we should be today. So what do I have here? How many people have seen this before? Some. If you're in InfoSec, it's almost, again, it's like InfoSec 101. Doesn't matter what certification you go for, they all test on this. The CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I have secrets, and I want to keep them secret. I have data that's not allowed to be changed by somebody without proper authorization. I want to protect it from that change. And I have systems that need to be online at certain times. I need to make sure they're online. If you go into a business owner, if you put anything in your questionnaires about the CIA triad, you're going to get the deer in headlights look. If you say, keep your secrets safe, keep data from being changed that shouldn't be changed, and keeping your systems online, even the most non-technical of business owners understands those three principles, those three concepts. This is going, who are my gamers again? Tabletop gamers. Does anybody recognize this photo? Yes. Have you played the game? Oh my God. If you don't play Carcassonne, little tile-based tabletop game, it's tremendous. My 14-year-old will never play with me again because we had one very intense game, but that's a story for another day. We also in InfoSec have this concept of defense in depth. And for the folks who sat in on Bill's talk earlier on the OWASP ASVS, that onion concept, the layers. There's not one security control that's going to sufficiently protect everything. But if we understand where these different layers are, where the different walls need to be, and then we build the right kind of wall, or we put the right kind of control in place, then we're going to have a reasonably secure business. Now, this is Carcassonne in France. For them during the medieval era, this was reasonably appropriate. I think if there were a village that cropped up today in France, I doubt that they go to this level of detail. Different time, maybe a different focus. But going back to what I said earlier, business owners understand their business. They understand what reasonable and appropriate is. And it's important for us to be able to speak to them on that level. Now, before I share the framework I'm putting forward, I do want to just call a spade a spade. I'm not tossing this out there to be another standard. I'm not presenting this to say we need to have one more thing that people can comply with. I want to step back and look at it from a different way. I want what I share today to be a foundation that is at the part of all the conversations you have with these third parties you're doing business with. And at the same time, if you're a bigger shop, I want you to look at your own program and say, do we even have this stuff in place? I don't expect you to say, yes, we comply with this. That's not the, if you take this list of controls and say, yes, 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 we comply, we're done, you're missing the point. It's a starting point, it's a foundation, it's what we build on. It's not meant to be another standard. But I want to get away from that complexity, and I want to just make it razor thin. I want it rock simple. I want it plain and basic and something that everybody can understand. So here's what I want to pitch. Every organization that does business today with any kind of footprint on the internet, kind of app, has these 7 things that they have to protect. I'm getting away from categories of controls, and I want you to come at it from a different angle and say, what are the things that we need to protect in order for our business to operate? And once we understand what those things are, I'll talk about, well, what are the things that we should be knowing to protect. So number 1, protect your applications. How many people have a web application at their business? At least one, right? How many people have mobile apps in the app stores? Yeah, these are fun, right? I've got to do some analysis of mobile apps for people today. Very much a target. If you have applications, you have to protect them, plain and simple. If you are going to do business today, whether you're a giant company or whether you're a sole proprietor who's got a website that you use to take customer orders, if you have an app on the internet or an app in the app store, you have to protect it. That's just what business is today in our globally connected, internet-capable world. You have to protect your endpoints. If there are any systems that your business uses to operate, workstations, kiosks, mobile devices. You have to protect. You also have to protect your network. I say network, you have to understand what a secure network looks like and the differences between wired and wireless. But there's data that's going to travel across the wire. What steps do you take to ensure that that data is protected? You have to protect your servers. You have to protect the data itself. You have to protect your locations, which is not so much an IT control, but has a relationship with IT controls, which is why it's in here. And then finally, and if everybody who was in Jason's talk this morning, you have to protect your people. And I'll come back to that in a sec. So what I've done, I've taken those 7 areas of protection and said, what are the 3 most important things that we could be doing in every one of those? If I'm a large corporation or small business, what are the 3 things that are relevant to me regardless of size of my company? And if I'm doing those three things well, am I going to have some sense that my security controls are reasonable and appropriate? That my business is going to be able to operate because I've done the right thing in the security space? What I put together was just a simple yes or no questionnaire to help people answer these questions. If you have a third party who you do business with and you want to know how well they're doing security, you should be able to take these questions, put it in front of them, and they can sit down and answer yes and no and give you a brief explanation. They're going to be able to answer the questions honestly. You're going to be able to understand and count on the answers the way they're put together. If they don't know how to do a thing, don't just wash your hands and say, good luck. Give them some guidance. One of the common questions that's come up on this engagement I'm on right now, well, Jerod, I don't know what that is. How do I do it? Well, state of Ohio, we cannot tell you how to do it, but I am allowed to give you guidance. I'm allowed to point you in the right direction. If you have any control that you expect a third party to comply with, then you should right away have 2 or 3 links or white papers or anything, someplace that they can go because you're the security expert. You're the one who knows how to do this. They don't. So give them a couple of resources to help them get started. And then just like with any other, what do I want to say, regulation or standard, any other approach to security, it's important to let them know that answering these questions one time isn't sufficient. I'm going to put the questions in front of you today, and then we'll set a time to come back and revisit it. Because things are going to change. If I had this time last year sit down and tried to have a conversation with any of my clients around Heartbleed, Bash, Shell Shock, I would have been speaking gibberish because that wasn't a factor. Those weren't issues that concerned me a year ago. So we're going to come back and just revisit that. And if it, for no other reason, it's just going to keep these concepts and these principles in their mind, help them keep it front of mind. So protect your applications. With each of these questions, there's a simple what's in scope and how do we do it. So with scope, you should point out, we're talking about web and mobile applications. The questions I think you should ask are, I've got kind of a how we do it. I'll show you the questions in a minute. Are you teaching your developers how to write secure code? There's an expectation that if anybody has a development responsibility within the organization, that they know how to write secure code. And how do we do that? That's where some of the guidance comes in play. OWASP it's ridiculous how much free information they have out there. Again, I'm going to point back to Bill because his talk this morning was spot on up here. The ASVS, Application Security Verification Standard, is one resource. The OWASP Code Review Project is another resource. The OWASP Testing Guide is another resource. And if you're a developer in-house, you should understand what these resources are and be using them in some capacity. If you're a small shop that doesn't even have a full-time IT person, but you have a web app, you paid somebody to build that app. So you should be asking them, do your developers know how to write secure code? Documenting your application security requirements is another control, that if there are expectations for this security, it's in project plans and it's in contracts. So that anybody who touches code is going to see it. You cannot assume that people are automatically going to do application security. And then the last is more of a verification. If you have a web app that lives on the internet, I think you should be scanning it for vulnerabilities. It's not going to catch everything, folks. But I'm playing, you might see it already, I'm playing by the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, that if we do a lot, or if we do a little bit, we're going to get a lot of effort. If I look at tools like Burp, what's a Burp license now, 300? It's still a little bit of cash, but it's affordable. It's more reasonable. Sorry? But worth it, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't even know, do we have alternatives to Burp that still give?
OS actually pushes what's it?
Zap, Z-Attack proxy has a scanner built into, and that's a free resource. It's the starting point. So again, this is how that conversation goes. You go into a business owner and say, we have these 3 expectations. And I'm not going into technical detail here. I'm trying to stay high level enough that I can talk to a business owner, or I can talk to their head IT person and say, these 3 things are you doing? And then they're going to understand right away. They may not understand the how, which is where you come into play with that education, but they understand that these 3 things are the starting point. So what's in scope for endpoints? Mobile devices, increasingly. How many people permit BYOD, bring your own device? Right? How many people want to permit BYOD? Right? But BYOD it's a direction that we're going, and that's one example of where we have devices on the network now that represent a risk to everything, especially jailbroken, rooted, and installed some nasty apps. But also workstations are in scope. Kiosks, if your business is one that has some kind of public computer that's a shared device, and then removable media. So how do we do it? Anti-malware on everything. And folks, anti-malware is not going to catch everything. But if I'm talking about some third-party attack or some developer who lives in a third-world country who doesn't understand how to write attack code, but understands how to reuse code. I did a, what was it? Ransomware. Help me out. I'm drawing a blank. CryptoLocker. Thank you. We had a client who got hit, and they updated their IDS IPS, and then the attackers came back and the IDS IPS picked it up. But they gave me the attack code, and I got to see it. And I pulled this attack code up, and I wasn't. The client didn't need me to do the attack code. It was just me curious. The code was like over 10 years old, and I thought that's ridiculous. How is it that we have this CryptoLocker attack, which is still kind of current, right? It's a new kind of approach, that combination of extortion and attack. But we have this ancient code. And then I'm looking at their comments where one of the developers talked about how the previous developer of the exploit code was such a noob and they had made it so much better. But if I Google for that search string, you could find it years and years ago. Why this is because you're just reusing the same code over and over. If they've got something that works, they're going to bleed it dry. If you have anti-malware on your endpoints, you're not going to protect against, like Jason's example of the social engineer who goes in and talks his way in. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to protect against those attackers who come from a background where they don't understand what they're writing, but they understand that there's something out there that they can reuse. All of your endpoints, even iOS devices. And I'm not saying go out and buy a thing. I'm not saying that like Lookout or Pray is going to be the best project. Anti-malware bytes, right? You guys know the malware bytes. So I'm not anti-malware. Malwarebytes.org, right? They have an app. It may not be the best app, it may not be perfect, but if it catches some of that garbage, then it's a positive control. Limit who has local admin rights and patch all the things. If you ask them about these 3 things on their workstations and they say no to any one of them, or 3 on any of their endpoints, then you've identified the gap where it's most likely that an attacker is going to take a foothold and get in. So what's in scope for the networks? Well, both wired and wireless, and then also cloud networks. How many people have a relationship with a cloud service provider where you have something out there? If we ask this question again in 3 years, we'll see even more hands. Because it's that notion that we can have organizations that specialize in a thing and offer these services that have driven us out to the cloud. Well, if you've not looked at the ACLs in the cloud, you may not even have access to them depending on your relationship. You may be making some assumptions about how secure the data is at that service provider from other tenants at that service provider. And then your VPN comes in scope. So how do we do it? Number one, separate segments. I had a client that had breach of corporate credit card, small business, but big location, right? A large facility. So I went out to the client, and we were doing an assessment to understand kind of an incident follow-up. Where might the attacker have come in? Client had 3 different wireless networks. One was public, one was encrypted WPA, and one was encrypted WPA2. If you got on any one of the wireless networks, you were on the same network as every one of their wired computers. So when I say wireless networks, what I really mean is they had 3 different wireless access points that were all configured differently, but still granted access to the same internal network. So this notion that we need to have a separation in our wired network, if we have restricted data, regulated data, data that we have to protect, it lives over here, and everybody else uses this network. Different subnets, and then maybe we can put a control in there. And then a DMZ for internet-facing systems. And then also wireless, kind of same token, corporate, guest, maybe even a BYOD. But this notion that we have different networks for different purposes. If you talk to any doctor office, I've shared this story in some of my mobile classes. One of my kids got braces. Joel was the first one. And we were sitting in the orthodontist office. My wife wanted me to come for the initial consult. And so we're all on our phones, right? Because that's what everybody does. And in the time I was in the office, ended up owning the wireless router. I wasn't necessarily engaged on a strict legal sense, but I was a concerned customer who was going to be sending like health data and financial data. And so I just poke around it. It's all the basic, default credentials and getting in. When I got on the wireless network, before I even got into the router, I looked at every other device on the wireless network, and their public guest network had back office billing and patient systems connected to it. That's not uncommon for small shops, especially healthcare shops like doctors, dentists, orthodontists, where they don't have full-time IT staff. So this is going to be new for them, but you can be the one to educate them on what that means to have these separate networks. Yeah. I feel like such an idiot because I didn't even ask. And I was very cautious as to how I explained it. My wife was terrified we were going to get kicked out.
Sounds like you could have just changed it on the back end.
Sorry?
I said, it sounds like you could have just changed it on the back end.
I could have gone in and given myself that's a good point. But I was more concerned that they were doing the right thing. And the next time I came back, though, they fixed everything, almost everything. It was enough that I was comfortable as a customer. Strong encryption for data in motion. If sensitive data is ever traveling between 2 systems, strong encryption. It's not the business owner's job to understand what strong encryption is. Ultimately, they're going to have a tech doing that. But SSL, now TLS, not just like financial information, but usernames and passwords. One of my favorite tools to use for people is SSL Labs, Qualys. It's their little site. Look at an SSL server and tell me how bad it is. And it's not that the people who look at those reports are going to understand every single thing in them, but it's a conversation starter. It's I got an F on my SSL server that handles all my patient information. Why is that? What do I need to do to make that better? They don't need to understand the details, but they need to understand that there are some exposures. And then multi-factor authentication for remote access. If we're going to have access to the internal network from the outside, some kind of second factor. Those are my 3 recommendations for network protection. Protecting servers. If it's a server, it's in scope, but understand that the different functions of the servers may require some different controls. That said, hardening your server should be step 1. Is there a consistent way that your admins build out a new server? Do they follow the same documented procedure every time? And does that procedure include making changes for the sake of security? What I just said right there, I promise you, I could talk to any business owner, and they're going to understand that language. They're not going to understand the Center for Internet Security hardening guides. They don't need to understand that, but they need to understand that we need to have consistency, and we need to have some actual actions that we're taking to lock these down. Manage and monitor admin accounts. If a new admin account ever shows up on your network, somebody should instantly get an alert. And if any changes to group membership, admin group membership ever happen, somebody should get an alert. because those are two key indicators of compromises. And as a shop that does pen testing, if any of you have done pen tests, you know, right, domain admin is one of the main targets we go for. And so any changes in that membership are going to show me something bad happens. And then scan and patching your servers on a regular basis. So you should not only be making changes to the server to lock down these security holes. I mean, Microsoft releases patches every month now, right? I mean, it's Patch Tuesday. We all know that. We should also be validating that those patches were actually applied. I was doing work for another client where they had an incredible network zoning structure. They did a tremendous job of keeping. I had to go into the data center and plug into a switch even to do a scan of the network because of how tightly they had it locked down. But they wanted that level of assurance. How secure are we? And so I found once I got in and did a scan, I found that they had a critical vulnerability on one of these systems, which baffled me. How could they be so tight in this other area and have this huge exposure when I know that they're scanning and patching on a regular basis? And so I took the information to the admin and said, yeah, you've got this vulnerability. I said, no, we don't. So I went through these steps. I looked. It's there. I promise you it's there. And they pulled up their patching Altiris, right? They pulled it up and said, nope, it's not on the Altiris report, and therefore it doesn't exist. What I ended up doing over the course of that engagement, we never resolved it, but the contact, the person who I was working with on the security team, got a hold of me about a month later and said, yeah, I just wanted you to know I finally got them to patch that box. And what had happened, their solution had actually pushed the patch out to the server, but it didn't take the installation steps. That piece had failed. But the tool that they were relying on to tell them that their system was secure against that type of attack thought that everything was in place. So they had a gap. It's not enough to patch your systems, but you have to have some second analysis or validation, some scanning to make sure the patching was successful. Again, if you're just doing these three things on your servers, you're going to significantly reduce the likelihood that anything bad is going to happen. I've heard instances of, and I'm not assuming anybody here does this, but instances of shops that have URL filtering in place where people can't see every website they want to see from the regular user subnet. Admins would go to servers to browse the internet because the server subnet tends not to be bound by the same filtering controls. And there was an instance where an admin pulled down a PDF to troubleshoot an issue that he was working on. So it's not like he was surfing porn. He was doing his job, pulled down a PDF, but the PDF was infected. And as soon as he opened the PDF, it popped not only the box, but then it started jumping around on the server subnet. And you say, well, Jerod, there's so many different controls we could put in place. If they had been doing these three things, and you try to pop that vulnerability on the servers, it would have failed. It wouldn't have gotten anywhere. One quick note on that. Whenever I say patching, it should also always include desktop and server applications as well as the operating system. If you're talking about patching or applying security patches or fixing whatever language you use, from this point forward, if you're not doing it today, include OS and apps in the same bucket. Don't separate them. I mean, you may need to use different tools, but they should all be in scope for what you're doing. Protecting your data, right? That's the stuff the attackers are going to go after. The stuff that, if it goes away, we're going to be really upset. Data rest and data in motion, we want to enforce the principle of least privilege. You can only get to it if you need it. We want to periodically review user access rights. I'm not going to assume that the domain admin group hasn't changed over time. I'm not even going to assume that the finance department hasn't changed. How many people work in an identity and access management role where you have to move users around? Right? It's a nightmare. It's who works for who. And, oh, this person just transferred, so they're in a new job. But because they're not done with their old job, they need access to all of this stuff. It's a lot to keep up with, folks. And you need somebody to come in on a regular basis and say, show me the list of everybody who can access my stuff. Is this really the right list? And the business owner should take ownership of that. And then encrypt all of your restricted data at rest. So just, I want to see us get, if for no other reason than to keep the NSA out, I want to see us get in the habit of encrypting any restricted data, sensitive data. bile into my background. I went to school to be a music teacher. I went to Capitol over in Bexley. I studied for 4 years, got to the very tail end of my degree time and said, you know what? I don't want to go into teaching music in the public schools. I love music, and I love teaching, but it wasn't for me. What I've done, though, is I've taken that, who I am, right, that background, that experience, and I have found that I love teaching. I love helping people understand things they don't understand. I think one of the reasons I've had some of the successes I've had in my career is because I take time to step away from being so angry that people don't have the right controls in place, or that they're not just doing basic security. And I sit down and I have those conversations with them and I talk through it and say, what do you need to know? What do you need to understand in order to be comfortable that you're doing what you need to do to secure your systems? And that's where this comes from. Because I think you can use this to go out and have those exact same conversations with all the third parties you do business with. And it's going to help raise that security awareness. It's going to raise the level of quality that comes to people actually securing their systems. But now, turn it around for a sec. Who are my big companies again? Big shops. Lots of people, lots of location. Could you answer yes to all 21 of those questions? Maybe. I don't need to see the definite yes or no here. But even if you're in a big shop, even if you're not a little company, if you are required to comply with PCI, and if you've got HIPAA controls and SOX controls, and if you've got GLBA, FERPA, and how many different acronyms can I rattle off? NERC, SIP, FERP, all of this. If you've got all that stuff that you're doing for the sake of putting these controls in place, what I'm telling you, just for today, toss all that stuff out the window. Come in like it's your first day on the job and look at what you're doing with your security program with respect to these 21 things. And if you don't feel comfortable that you can do all 21 of those, then maybe we can step back from the blanky boxes, and maybe we can step back in the exercises to get the metrics on the dashboard. I really need to get that AV coverage from 98.7 to 98.9 so that leadership will get off my back. Just step back and say, how well am I doing with respect to these 21 things? And if you feel comfortable that you've got those in place, build on that. That's your foundation. But if you're not doing these guys, if you're not doing the basics, and I know we've been talking about it as an industry for a long time. We got to do the basics. We got to do the fundamentals. We got to blocking and tackling. How many other analogies have you heard for doing the basics? And what I'm doing is I'm not talking. I'm actually putting something down and saying, here it is, go use it. And so what I did yesterday, actually let me jump out and show you that real quick. I love WordPress because I can sit down in an hour, and the hardest part of WordPress for me is picking a theme. So it's ugly. I don't care. What I have right here is a website that you can point people to. And if you have anybody outside of your company say, I don't know how to do security, it's commonsenseframework.org. You can say, go out here. And folks, that's the whole website. There's one page. But I wanted to point out that down here, I've got this spreadsheet. Yeah, let me see, I've got it up over here. There we go. Nope, that's not it. How about that? And if there's one thing I can say from my 15-some years of experience, I can make a mean spreadsheet. I'm kind of embarrassed by that, but for this, I'll set it aside. I put all the questions in the spreadsheet. And it's a simple enough spreadsheet that you could, in the course of a half-an-hour conversation with anybody, with leadership, with your IT teams, with your third-party providers, just go through the 21 questions, yes or no. And then the important part here is this column. So you say yes to that? Explain to me how. How do we do that? Oh, yeah, I guess I really can't explain. I can't articulate. If they can't articulate how they do a control, you know what? We're going to flag it as a no right now, but once you're able to articulate it, come back and we'll flip it over to a yes. And then what I've got on the right-hand side is just guidance. But it's important that you have something to put in front of people. And something like this, a really short questionnaire, anybody can handle this, right? This isn't complicated. It's not rocket science. But it's there so that you have something you can start using today. That if you don't know how to have security conversations with people outside of your company, if you don't know how to have security conversations with people inside of your company, say, I want to step back and take a fresh look at how we're doing security. I just want to ask a handful of questions and see how many we have a yes and how many we have a no. So integrating this, move this back. Integrating this into your business process is pretty straightforward. You have to assess your current state, which I think going through that questionnaire is kind of that assessment. What are we doing today when it comes to security? We actually talk through beginning to end. Have an open and honest conversation about your risk appetite. Prior to my time at Abercrombie, I was at American Electric Power. American Electric Power, heavily regulated, critical national infrastructure, very risk averse, thank God. Abercrombie, a little more risk accepting. You know, I heard the phrase, Jerod, we sell t-shirts more than once, which I thought was ironic when I read about the Home Depot breach and one of the security guys leaked that they raised concerns and somebody said, we sell hammers. I showed my wife, I'm like, I heard that. I mean, not hammers, but I heard that. But you need to have an open, honest conversation about your risk appetite because, again, fat guy in a little coat, it's not one size fits all. Some organizations are willing to accept the extra risk. It's our job, again, to educate them on what that risk is. But trust the business leaders. If you're doing your job to educate them, they're doing a lot more than just IT security. They're the ones who really have to answer for your risk appetite. Set a goal for how secure you want or need to be. Determine how much money you're going to spend each year on security. Because we can throw free tools out all day, but they're not going to run themselves. Somebody's got to do it. Research solutions to help meet your security goal, and something doesn't exist in your price range, get creative. Implement the missing controls, schedule recruiting tests, and then down here at step 8 and 9, this is where leadership is going to come down to it, and they really want to take ownership of it. You got to measure it. And I love metrics and hate metrics at the same time, because I think metrics can distract us from what we're really trying to do. But if you don't actually measure it, you don't know how effective it is. You don't have an understanding. But whether it's some kind of dashboard that you put up in front of leadership, whether it's an IT risk register to show what are the risks that we're managing and what actions are we taking on it, there's some way of measuring it. And then repeat it. So again, as part of that half-hour conversation, maybe you extend it 45 minutes and talk to them about doing just that. For folks who haven't heard me talk before, that's featuring me, I'm real big on resources. It's everything you need. I've tried to put it here in the presentation, but there may be stuff outside. I've got a few websites that I try to keep up with that if you're interested in this and wanted to keep tabs on what the next phase of it is. Common Sense Framework, InfoSec Simplified, and then Slondel.net are all places I'm going to be sharing this information. And then toward the end, I talked about some of those resources for what can we do. Again, I wanted to give you stuff to be effective right away. So for some of the controls in here, you can come out. I've got a lot of AppSec. I spent a lot of time in that space. A/B comparatives and A/B test. Anybody know those sites? They're pretty slick. They're independent analysis of antivirus tools. If you want to know how effective an A/B tool is, how easy it is to manage, they've done all the heavy lifting for you. You just got to pull up the list and see which one fits. Center for Internet Security is hands down the best resource for how to harden a system, I think you'll find. University of Berkeley has kind of a landing page where they go to a lot of places, but the CIS benchmarks are, here are all the things you can harden, pick the ones that matter to you. And then that SSL Labs piece that I mentioned. And Bill, are you still back there? Yes. He stepped out. There's my end tag, right? So I've got the tag. It's everything I wanted to stand up here and rant about, folks. But again, I've been living this life for so stinking long now that these are the patterns, these are the trends I'm seeing. I see a lot of people talking about it, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to give people a simple way of going out and doing this. So that's my thing. So questions, comments, Phil?
Yeah, I'm just curious, your list of items here, the 7 or 8 topics, are those, they're numbered, is that ordered by priority, or is that just, these are the components of the big picture we need to consider?
No, that's, when I looked at it, Phil, that's a great question. So with the 1 through 7, is that priority?
Yeah.
Not my intent at all, because it comes back to that risk appetite. There's some shops that don't have any brick and mortar, so protecting locations is not something that's going to be a big deal to them. There's some shops that have thousands of retail outlets, hundreds of retail outlets, so that physical location is going to be different. I put them in order of, if I were to sit down and map a critical data flow at any company, right, data coming in, data going out, I was just trying to follow that flow. That's the flow that came natural to me.
Totally makes sense. I was just curious, making sure that it wasn't, that there wasn't any justification for why it was ordered that way.
That's fair.
More importantly, so what you're saying is a risk management process is pretty vital to being able to manage those components, right?
Yeah, this is how you have that conversation about risk. You go through all these and say, by the nature of having a business with computers involved, we have to address all of these things. These are all areas of risk that we have to contend with. What are we doing? But yeah, what's going to come back, or what's going to come out of it, which is, again, this is just that foundation. This is the building blocks. What comes next is, well, what are the tools and processes that we need to keep track of this stuff, to make changes, to actually reduce our exposure to these areas. But yeah, risk is at the heart of everything. Good question. Any other questions? Well, folks, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to stand up here and rant. I'm here. I'll probably have to jet before the last keynote to get some work done today. But if you have questions, comments, please catch me. Even if it's not in person, catch me online, because what I didn't mention, I have a GRC vendor that I'm speaking with, that I'm trying to get them to put this in their tool so that we can start showing people how to do this. So it's not just me standing in front of a bunch of my peers saying, guys, here's a way to do it, let's all do it. But I'm trying to come at it from another angle too, to say, hey vendor, you've got the visibility of all these customers. Let's get this out there. And if there's a better way to do it, tell me, because I want to know. But the important takeaway is we can't just talk about it. We got to actually start making stuff like this and using it. So have you take